What if the person you're meant to spend your life with finds you because of a piece of paper you never meant for them to see? Stay with me, because this story is about to get very personal. This is the story of a girl who stopped believing in love, a soldier of the sea who almost gave up on connection, and one small paper boat that changed everything. Let's get into it. Our story begins in a tiny coastal town called Pelican Cove, Maine. If you've never been to the coast of Maine in February, picture this. Gray skies, freezing wind coming straight off the Atlantic, and a lighthouse standing at the edge of the rocks like it's been guarding that town since the beginning of time. That lighthouse belonged to a man named Walter Hayes. Everyone in town just called him Grandpa Walt. He was 78 years old, a retired fisherman, and honestly, one of the last true lighthouse keepers still living on the East Coast. Grandpa Walt lived there with his granddaughter, Emma Hayes, 26 years old, sharp, funny, a little guarded, the kind of woman who'd rather fix a boat engine herself than wait around for someone to help her. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Every single year, on Valentine's Day, Emma had this quiet little ritual. Nobody in town really knew about it. She'd fold a small paper boat, write one wish inside. Never a name, just a wish. And she'd walk down to the water's edge and let the tide take it. She'd been doing this since she was 16 years old. This year, though, this year was different. Because this year, that little paper boat didn't sink. It didn't disappear into the ocean like it had every year before. It drifted. And what or who it drifted toward was about to change two lives forever. But let's back up for a second, because you need to understand who Emma really was before we go any further. 3 years earlier, Emma had been engaged. His name doesn't even matter anymore. What matters is that 2 weeks before the wedding, he left. No warning, no real explanation, just a text message and an empty apartment. Since then, Emma had thrown herself into two things: taking care of Grandpa Walt and keeping the lighthouse running exactly the way her late grandmother used to. She'd built a wall so high around her heart that even her closest friends in town had stopped trying to set her up on dates. So that paper boat, that wasn't just a whim. That was the one place Emma allowed herself to still hope, even if just a little, once a year, in secret. Now, back to the coastline. About 4 miles down from the lighthouse sits a small Coast Guard station on Raven Point. And that's where we meet our second main character, Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, 29 years old, recently transferred from a station down in Norfolk, Virginia. Jake wasn't exactly thrilled about the transfer. Trading warm Virginia winters for freezing Maine mornings? Not his idea of a good time. He was quiet, a little closed off since his last deployment, and honestly, he hadn't planned on staying in Pelican Cove for long. He figured he'd put in his time, keep to himself, and request a transfer back south the first chance he got. But the ocean had other plans. Early one freezing morning, during his patrol along the rocky shoreline, Jake spotted something small and white wedged between two rocks. At first, he thought it was trash, almost walked right past it. But something made him stop. He crouched down, picked it up, and realized it wasn't trash at all. It was a paper boat, soaked, wrinkled, but still holding together. And inside, in careful handwriting, there was a message. I wish someone would come into my life who loves hearing my grandfather's stories and isn't afraid of the sea. Jake stood there on that cold beach for a long moment, just staring at those words. See, here's something you need to know about Jake. His mother grew up in a fishing family, and when Jake was only 9 years old, his father, a career fisherman, went out on a boat one October morning and never came home. You'd think that would make Jake afraid of the water, terrified of it even. But it didn't. If anything, the ocean pulled him closer. Like something out there still connected him to his father. Like the sea wasn't the enemy. It was just unpredictable, powerful, something you had to respect, not fear. So when he read those words, "isn't afraid of the sea," something in his chest tightened. It felt less like a coincidence. It felt like the ocean had handed him something meant just for him. He didn't know it yet, but that little paper boat was about to lead him straight to the woman who wrote it. For the next couple of days, Jake couldn't stop thinking about that little paper boat. He kept it in his jacket pocket, telling himself it was just curiosity, just a strange little mystery in an otherwise boring assignment. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He asked around the station, casually, about who in town might still keep old traditions like that. One of the older guys, Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, laughed and said, "Sullivan, this is a small town. Everybody's got a story. You want answers? Go talk to Walt Hayes up at the lighthouse. That old man knows everything and everyone." So, a few days later, Jake got assigned to a routine task, checking water safety conditions near the old lighthouse docks on the north side of town. Standard procedure, nothing special. Except this time, he made sure to volunteer for it himself. When he pulled up near the lighthouse, an old man was sitting outside on a wooden bench, wrapped in a thick flannel jacket, sipping coffee like it was the middle of summer. "You're the new Coast Guard fella," Grandpa Walt said, not even looking up. "Heard about ya. Sit down, have some coffee. It's cold enough to freeze the ocean today." Jake laughed and sat down. And that's how it started. An easy conversation between an old fisherman and a young Coast Guard officer. The kind of conversation that just flows, no effort required. And that's exactly when Emma walked out of the lighthouse, hands full of firewood, hair pulled back, completely unaware that her whole world was about to shift. She stopped in her tracks when she saw Jake, not because he was in uniform, because the second he stood up to introduce himself, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn, water-stained paper boat. Emma's eyes went wide. The firewood in her arms nearly slipped right out of her hands. "Wait," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. That's mine." For a second, nobody said anything. Grandpa Walt looked between the two of them, a slow, knowing smile creeping across his weathered face. The kind of smile that told you he'd seen a lot of things in 78 years, and he had a pretty good feeling about where this one was headed. Jake held the little paper boat out toward her, almost like he was afraid it might dissolve in his hands. "I found this on the rocks near Raven Point," he said. "I probably shouldn't have read it, but I did. And I guess I couldn't stop thinking about it." Emma's cheeks turned red, not from the cold this time. She set the firewood down slowly, her mind racing. Nobody was supposed to find that boat. Nobody was supposed to read those words. That wish was hers alone, a secret she'd carried since she was 16. And now a total stranger in a Coast Guard uniform was standing in front of her, holding it like it meant something to him too. And that, right there, is the moment two strangers realized the ocean had done something neither of them expected. But here's the real question. Was this fate? Or was Jake about to make the biggest mistake of his life by getting close to a woman who'd spent years building walls around her heart? Because Emma Hayes did not let people in easily. Not since the last person she trusted broke a promise she never fully recovered from. And Jake Sullivan was about to learn exactly why. Last time, we left off with a moment that felt like fate. A paper boat, a secret wish, and a Coast Guard officer standing face to face with the woman who wrote it. But fate doesn't fix a broken heart overnight. and Emma Hayes had a wall around hers that wasn't coming down without a fight. So what happens when someone the universe practically hand-delivers to your doorstep isn't someone you're ready to let in? Let's finish this story. For a long moment after Emma recognized her own handwriting on that little paper boat, nobody moved. The wind off the Atlantic cut through the silence, and Grandpa Walt just sat there on his bench, sipping his coffee, clearly enjoying every second of this.
"Well," Grandpa Walt finally said, breaking the tension, "you gonna invite the man in for coffee, Em? Or are we just gonna stand out here till we all freeze?" Emma shot her grandfather a look, the kind only a granddaughter can give, but she stepped aside anyway. "Fine, come in. But this doesn't mean anything," she added quickly, glancing at Jake. "You just happened to find something private, that's all." Jake raised his hands, half smiling. Understood. Strictly coffee. But both of them knew that wasn't entirely true. Because sometimes, the moment you tell yourself something means nothing is exactly the moment it starts meaning everything. Inside the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the wood stove crackled, and the smell of coffee and cedar filled the small living room. Old black and white photographs lined the walls. Fishing boats, storms, a young Walter Hayes standing proud next to a woman Jake assumed was Emma's late grandmother. Jake sat across from Grandpa Walt at the kitchen table, while Emma busied herself pouring coffee, keeping just enough distance to feel safe. "So, Coast Guard, huh?" Grandpa Walt said, studying Jake carefully. "Your daddy served too?" Jake's jaw tightened slightly. "No, sir. My father was a fisherman, out of Virginia Beach." Grandpa Walt set his mug down slowly. "Was?" "He didn't come back from a trip when I was 9, Jake said quietly. Storm came in fast. Boat went down about 40 miles offshore." The room went quiet. Emma, who'd been pretending not to listen from the kitchen, stopped what she was doing entirely. Grandpa Walt nodded slowly, like something in him understood that pain on a level most people couldn't. "I'm sorry, son. Truly am." He paused, then added, "You know, that's not so different from something that happened to me. Long time ago." And that's when Grandpa Walt told Jake, and really told Emma too, though she'd heard bits of it before, the story that would end up connecting all three of them in a way none of them expected. "It was the winter of 1974, Grandpa Walt began, his voice slipping into that slow, steady rhythm of a man who's told a story enough times to know exactly where the important parts are. I was maybe 26 years old, had my own boat by then, out of this very harbor. One night in February, a fishing vessel out of Rockland got caught in a storm nobody saw coming. 4 men on board." He took a sip of coffee, staring out the window toward the gray water. "Coast Guard couldn't get a cutter out fast enough. Waves were too high, wind was tearing everything apart. But I knew those waters better than any radar system. Grew up on them. So I took my little boat out anyway, against every warning they gave me." Emma, despite having heard pieces of this story her whole life, sat down slowly at the table, hanging on every word, same as Jake was. "Found them about 2 miles out, clinging to a piece of the hull. Pulled all 4 men aboard, one at a time, hands so cold I could barely feel my own fingers by the end of it. Got 'em back to shore just before sunrise." Jake leaned forward. "That's incredible." "It wasn't incredible," Grandpa Walt said, shaking his head. "It was just what you do. See, son, the ocean takes people. It's taken people from this town longer than anybody can remember. But it also gives you chances. Chances to show up for each other when it matters most. Your father's boat, my rescue that night, it's all the same ocean. same risk. But that don't mean you run from it. You just learn to respect it, and you keep showing up anyway.
Jake sat with that for a long moment. He'd spent 20 years quietly afraid that loving the sea made him disloyal to his father's memory. But hearing Grandpa Walt say it out loud, that respecting the water wasn't betrayal, it was honoring it, something in his chest finally loosened. Emma watched Jake's face change in that moment, and for the first time since meeting him, her guard slipped, just slightly.
Over the next several weeks, Jake kept finding reasons to come back to the lighthouse. A safety inspection here, a weather check there. Grandpa Walt started teasing him openly about it, but Jake didn't care. He and Emma started talking more. Really talking. About her grandmother, about the fiancé who left her 2 weeks before her wedding, about why she'd stopped believing anyone would stick around long enough to matter. "I'm not him," Jake told her one evening, as they sat on the dock, watching the sunset paint the water orange and pink. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not unless you ask me to." Emma didn't answer right away. The dock creaked beneath them as a gull called somewhere out over the water, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. She thought about all the reasons she had to keep her guard up. The empty apartment, the unanswered texts, the years of telling herself she didn't need anyone. And then she thought about the weeks that had just passed. Sunday dinners, quiet coffee mornings, a man who kept showing up, even when she gave him no reason to. But she didn't pull her hand away when he reached for it either. And slowly, without either of them announcing it out loud, something shifted between them. Quiet, steady, real. By the time winter started melting into early spring, Jake wasn't just the Coast Guard officer who happened to find a paper boat. He was part of Sunday dinners at the lighthouse. He was the one Grandpa Walt called when the old fishing boat needed an extra set of hands. He was, without either of them ever officially saying it, Emma's person. Then Valentine's Day came around again. Emma walked down to the water's edge that morning, just like she had every year since she was 16. She folded a piece of paper carefully, the way she always did. But this year, she didn't write a wish. She wrote a name. Jake. And instead of letting the tide carry it away, she turned around. And there he was, standing behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her with a smile he wasn't even trying to hide. "I saw you out here," he said. "Figured I'd come see what you were wishing for this year." Emma held the little paper boat out to him instead of the ocean. "I'm not wishing for anything anymore," she said softly. "The person I was looking for already found me." Jake took the boat from her hands, folded his fingers gently around hers, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma Hayes let herself fully believe that love hadn't given up on her after all. So, here's what this story really comes down to. Sometimes the thing we're searching for isn't out there somewhere far away. It's closer than we think, waiting for us to stop guarding our hearts long enough to notice it. Emma spent years believing love was something you lost, not something you found again. But healing didn't come from forcing herself to move on. It came from someone showing up, again and again, patiently, honestly, until trust had room to grow back. And Jake, a man who carried grief about the sea for 20 years, learned that respecting the thing that hurt you doesn't mean running from it. Sometimes it means showing up for it anyway, the same way Grandpa Walt showed up for those 4 men in 1974. If there's one thing to take from this story, it's this. Don't let one broken promise convince you that every promise is destined to break.
The right person isn't looking for someone perfect. They're looking for someone real, someone who's still willing to try, even after life has given them every reason not to. Sometimes the love you've stopped searching for finds you exactly when and exactly how you least expect it. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. And if you believe love always finds its way back around, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got a lot more stories just like this one coming your way.